Welcome to the program. This program is run by our organization, which is called Only Emes. There'll be a link to our website. There are some articles and there's some blog posts about progress of some projects we're working on. I'm Dan Taller, and this is Saul Shajnfeld. We are the presenters for this program. I want to let you know that at some point in the future, if anybody becomes interested in maybe being a co-presenter, for a program, if you have a lot of things you'd like to talk about, if you have something that you want to be more involved in the discussion of, and you've got a computer where you can get on the webcam and a microphone, you'll have to let me know in advance, and I'll have to help you set it up because it's a little glitchy. But you're more than welcome to. Just let me know by email. Last session, which was quite a number of weeks ago, we had a lot of trouble with the recording, and we had a lot of trouble with, we had 3 hosts at once, and there was some issues with the camera. It did not end up getting finalized and put on YouTube because there's just too much to chop out. However, what I'd like to do is today I'd like to reintroduce just a few of the topics we were talking about last time, and just basically cover them briefly. Saul, I don't know if you had anything that you wanted to announce before I go to that. There were a couple of news announcements I wanted to get to. Is there anything that you in particular wanted to mention?
Not right now. I might as we go along.
Okay. This program is really it's fairly casual. It's discussion. It's a back and forth. I like to think of it as a call-in show without being really a call-in show, because we operate it online. We're not in a studio, but our goal is to have the discussion and have the interactivity that you have available in that kind of forum. And so it's a different system, but it achieves the same thing, and hopefully we'll grow our audience over time, and more people responding during the program, sending in questions in advance, or asking questions about some of the things we discuss. We discuss a variety of topics. Some of them are they are all to do with Judaism and the Jewish people. We may run into a tangent off of these specifics, but all of our discussions really are they are for the purpose of enlightening and bringing awareness to the concerns that we have, and to the things that we would like to see happen in the future. And these are things we're trying to be a part of. One other thing that I am going to hopefully start pretty soon will be also a program that's going to happen online. The internet's a beautiful thing. It allows us to do a lot of things which you would normally need to get together in person, and it enables a nice a personal touch as opposed to just emails and websites and forums. There will be a program that I'm going to start, and I didn't just come up with the idea of this. I knew that I wanted to do this in some kind of fashion in the future, but a lot of people have been talking to me privately, and there are a lot of people that I think would benefit from having a kind of peer-based support group. It will not have any specific focus in particular. It will not be topic-based or anything like the way we do on this show. It is more going to be just a support system, a support group where people can share their experiences, their troubles, and and help each other out. Hopefully, we can gain at the minimum a sense of companionship and community, and that in and of itself has a lot of value. And I think that when we share the challenges in our lives that we are experiencing, and the results that they've had, the effect they've had on us, I think between all of us, and I hopefully I intend to be involved in this as much as possible, possibly every single time. The hope that the idea from my perspective is that we will be able to benefit from sharing these things and hearing from one another. And hopefully one person might have something that can in some way uh, inspire another. Between a group, the idea is to simply to gain from the sharing of our troubles and experiences. We have our final attendee just logged in, so that's terrific. So that's that announcement. So I don't know if you remember last time we started on the topic of education, and uh, some of us have gone to modern schools. There are a lot of Jewish people, even Orthodox people, who went to public school. Our the concern that we have, the topic we were talking about is education, but specifically when the education is not sufficient in the secular studies area. Um, and this is not unique to Haredi schools. Haredi schools, it's terrible, quite frankly. It's absolutely terrible. Not only are they not educated in certain topics because the faculty being on the very, very religious side, they don't they don't want to face the kind of challenges and the kind of discrepancies that certain education um, you know brings about. But even a lot of modern schools, you know, they will they will avoid certain topics. I hope that in this day and age, I hope that it's improving. But there's still a lot of modern schools where they really feel it's necessary to adhere to certain standards that I personally think are outmoded. But even bigger concern than simply the omission of certain information is misinformation, is deliberately miseducating people, and in very blunt terms, it's lying, um, and that leads children to grow up into adults who genuinely think that they have been educated in certain topics. And from personal experience, I have friends who this pertains to. Um, Modern Orthodox people who have families and have careers, professions, many of them very successful, but they believe that they were educated in certain topics, and they are completely wrong. Everything that they understand about it is barely barely connected to what the subject matter really is. And that's one major problem. And I know that there is a group that's trying um, to I don't really know how he's trying this, but there's a small group that's trying to advocate for all yeshivas to raise the standards and to maintain their secular education to a certain standard. Um, I don't know how likely he is to have any success. I think it's a huge, it's very ambitious, but I think that I wonder what would any of these institutions, what incentive would they possibly have other than just being told you're lying to the kids? Um, I I don't know, and I think some people, unfortunately, nobody in our audience today, I don't think knows them personally. But Saul, if you would like to contribute anything to this piece of you know of the topics from our last conference, I'd certainly like for you to go through the kind of the things that you said last time.
Yeah. The first thing that comes to mind is that a few months ago, I went to a doctor in Borough Park, and he was a relatively young guy in his late 40s, I think, educated in the UK, a firm guy with a beard, but a doctor. I started talking to him about evolution, and he looked at me like, "You don't believe in that nonsense, do you?" And I said, "I'm surprised to hear that from a doctor." But here he had gone through college and medical school, and learned about the human body and about a little bit about genetics and the other things that one learns in medical school, and still thought that evolution was a joke. And I was kind of shocked and told him I would send him some materials on it. But it's at least he's a doctor. When you go to Williamsburg, try to look for a doctor who is a sophomore chassid. I don't think you'll find any. I've never heard of one because in order to get into medical school, you generally need a college education, which they don't advocate. But people have told me that a doctor is not a scientist. A doctor is just a tradesman. This trade happens to be medicine and the human body.
A practitioner.
Excuse me?
Practitioner.
Practitioner, yeah. Just as a lawyer can be very educated and not know anything of any importance other than law. These are not intellectuals, even though they have advanced degrees. So it is very frightening, and I've heard rabbis in synagogues get up and say that evolution is a trick, and all of the fossils are doctored by scientists who are out to destroy God. And you have these crazy things, and I don't know how much influence they have, but I guess it depends on the audience. If you're in a school where the average member is a professional who's gone to graduate school, a rabbi like that couldn't survive. But in a lot of schools, a rabbi can do damage to reality by saying things like that. And of course, the older rabbis all read Avigdor Miller when they were growing up, and Miller had his own view, and a lot has been learned since then about evolution and about science, and they're still talking Miller's views. So the educational problem is in the schools and in the shuls. I've read articles by Orthodox Jewish scholars and rabbis who bemoan the fact that the average synagogue rabbi doesn't know much about the conflict between Torah and modern knowledge, and will give you the same old hackneyed answers, and really be totally at dealing with these issues. There are some rabbis who are, but many of them are not. So these are some of the things that need to be addressed, most prominently in the schools, but also in the synagogues. And there's so much ignorance. I meet people who are in sort of crazy scientific jobs, and when I mention evolution, they say, "I can't believe that the universe is 14 billion years old, and that we've been evolving, life has been evolving for 3 billion years. It just doesn't make sense to me. You pour a bunch of chemicals together, and you shake it up, and out pops DNA." And they just have no of what science has brought to bear on some of these questions. So there's a very big void in the Orthodox community.
I think it's interesting when you were mentioning doctors that they're just practitioners, and you mentioned an attorney, lawyer. If you were to ask him something, he doesn't necessarily know anything about it. Even within a practice, even within a profession, I have some family who practice a certain kind of law, a certain kind of medicine. There's so many fields within a field that, with a doctor it's tricky, because a doctor really, if you really can't go to medical school and get through medical school without learning about this stuff. This doctor you mentioned clearly just didn't believe it and ignored it, or just said, whatever, I don't care. It doesn't gel with my religion, so I just don't care. But he got the information. He was given the information. Whereas most other professions, I've been asked, I'm an IT professional for so many years I can't count. And people, are surprised I don't do web design. Web design is a graphics art. You do have to know a lot of programming now, and despite the fact that they divide up the different pieces of technology involved, it's kind of a combination of some lightweight programming and graphic design, but it's an art much more than it's an information technology field. Same with law. If you do injury, or if you do real estate contracts, or things like that, or work in family law, you can't be a defense attorney. I mean, you could, but you'd be terrible, because these are specific sections. With medicine, I imagine there are things that you can do in the medical profession where if evolution is not a huge part of being involved in your results, but it certainly was taught to you. And I suspect that this person who that you spoke with, who's a doctor and doesn't believe in evolution, he was certainly not only taught it, but it certainly was evident in medical school while learning about anatomy, and while learning about a lot of the different problems that can arise with a human being, congenital illnesses and all kinds of things, diseases. These things are often related to other species in origin and in similarity, and you know things like transplants, from taking pieces from an animal. So in this case, it's got to be a case of that person just decided to push it out of his mind. And like one of our uh, one of our people attending by phone type told me, he calls it a split personality, but you and I, we refer to it as cognitive dissonance. They can use the tools that are derived from the knowledge, the as close to certainty as we can get, that those conclusions are accurate, that our species is a descendant of an ancient species that divided up into many different ones. They can know that, and they can apply their skill consistent with that, and at the same time, they can simply not believe it's true. And I don't know how they do it. I'm not a psychiatrist, but apparently this is a very common phenomenon, where they simply separate.
I think it's called denial.
Well, I thought it was called cognitive dissonance.
Yeah, but it's a type of denial.
Uh-huh.
Denial of realities, and belief in what you want to believe, notwithstanding the facts. It's a type of cognitive dissonance to the extent that they actually accept the findings, rather than simply use them, because that's the medical standard of practice. But yes, I mean, if you're specializing in genetics, and congenital diseases, you really do have to understand and accept evolution. You can't really do it. Most doctors, their practice involves a significant degree of physiology, and physiology based on biology, and biology nowadays, it cannot be understood without evolution.
Well, it can't progress.
It can't be properly understood, but I think that the doctors who are researchers and who are academics, who teach medicine or who do research in medicine, would be more into evolution than the ones who have an office, and dermatologists and internists. As you said, they don't need to really buy into it in order to do the jobs. But it is frightening that people who have an exposure to medicine and physiology can close their eyes to the reality as easily sometimes as as someone who's a lawyer or a carpenter.
Yeah.
It shows you the strength of the brainwashing.
It shows you the fragility, the vulnerability of the brain, because our brain is not, it's not like a computer. It learns, and if it learns wrong and forms, knowledge out of that misinformation, it can be repaired, but to a certain extent, if it's done enough, you, in a sense, can get locked into uh, like a no escape scenario, because any kind of new input you try to put in, or any type of influence you try to work in order to bring out certain ideas and correct a little bit at a time, there's already been a mechanism put in place that defends against that, it counters it. And I think it's possible for a human mind to be completely locked in and crippled, and such a person can function in society just fine. They simply know the wrong knowledge.
Tremendous resistance to change, which only goes to buttress the importance of getting proper early education, so that
and that's why the Haredi schools from the beginning, they start it right when they get into nursery, and from there forward the brainwashing begins, and they teach them lies, and not talking about teaching them Torah or anything like that. I'm not even going to approach that. I'm going to purely when it comes off of that topic. You and I have our opinions about what the Torah and the Gemara and all those things, what they are by nature, and a lot of people consider a lot of it to be lies. But let's not even talk about that. Just the secular education, they manipulate how they teach them so that the kids learn a completely wrong path of information, and it starts from the beginning, and it's a system. It's a really clever system, unfortunately, and it works. And
they skip chapters in books, and they tear out pages from.
They skip chapters of the Torah. When I was in elementary school and high school, throughout elementary and high school, I never learned parts of the Chumash. I always wondered, like, why do they teach this, and this, and then we skip and we learn that piece? Why don't just in first grade start from Bereshis and just progress as you go along? No, they teach like the canonical ones, the ones that fit really nicely into our positive view of Judaism, and these are like the iconic stories. These are like in a nutshell, our history. There is so much that's completely omitted because it's either horrible, makes no sense, contradicts the other pieces, or a variety of other reasons. They don't teach you those. They figure when you're 25 or 30 years old, and you're thoroughly brainwashed and indoctrinated, you'll be able to go and say, all right, I have to now learn these more deeper things and find out what they really mean, because they can't really mean what they say they mean, because I know, all this. Again, like I said, it's a system. It's a really clever system, and it just shows how vulnerable we are, how vulnerable our minds are to information and to learning the wrong way, and learning the wrong things. And I wonder, when we were talking about a doctor, and you said, let's say somebody in a medical field where they do medical research, where they do research for a pharmaceutical company, or they do research for, organ transplants, things like that. Even such a person, I would suspect that it is possible, and I wonder how many people actually exist like this. It is possible for a person like that to know and understand the process of evolution, its history, the history of evolution on our planet, to understand those links, both genetic and with physiology, between human and a lot of other species, and to use that in their practice and to rely on it and to trust it. And at the end of the day, go home and all that makes sense, and I use it, and I use it assuming it's true, but I don't think it's true, because somehow through magic it all makes sense, but it's still not true, because Hashem. End of story. And that's like, a really, really extreme case. And if you think about it, once you know that the brain is capable of doing this, there really isn't any limit to how extreme it can get. I mean, I can conceive of a person like that. I rely on this system. I will use it diligently and never fail to adhere to the knowledge we've acquired and the understanding we have and its rules and specifications, and be really good at it and make tremendous breakthroughs in science. But at the end of the day, I'm working within a system that I think makes sense, and I trust it, and I really produce results with it. But at the end of the day, I go home and I think it isn't the reality. The reality is what Hashem and the Torah. But I could still do this job because I'm simply learning, a trade. Or I wonder if there are people like that. If they really will like work in such. I mean, look at the poster boy for Christianity. What's his name? The from the Genome Project. What's his name again?
That wasn't Crick and
No.
Next project, yeah.
No, I actually saw a lecture by James Watson. Really brilliant guy. Francis Collins. Francis Collins is this guy who was, and people say he, the human genome, whatever. Okay, he was in the leadership of a team of many, many hundreds of scientists, but still very, very involved. And he not only believes in God, he believes in the entire Christian story, the Jesus and everything, which is the religion he was brought up in. Surprise, surprise. So that's a wonderful case of cognitive dissonance, and they use him as he's their idol, because they show that it's possible for somebody to be so immersed in the study of science that really contradicts, biblical claims, and yet he believes in that. Funny, he believes in exactly the one he was brainwashed in, but but
Thanks to one of our listeners for supplying us with names.
Yeah, I actually remembered it just as he was typing it, so.
Yeah.
But
thank you. I was reading some of those sites recently, and reading the writings of eminent scientists, physicists, and chemists, and there are some rabbis who are doing the same thing. And what they do is they'll accept evolution, but not exactly the version of evolution that Darwin came up with, which is basically random mutations. They believe that God either interacts and molds the evolution to lead towards human development, or that the system of mutations somehow has built into it a teleology, a goal of producing intelligent life, and then they bring Jesus in and say how Jesus was the culmination of all this. The rabbis, I read part of a book by a famous Reform rabbi, and in which he said, obviously evolution is true, but can you imagine the first terrestrial creature that crawled into the water and started swimming and developed fins and gills, and compared that creature to to that man in the Torah who jumped into the Red Sea as it was parting. What was that? Nachshon, Aminadab, I think.
Was it him?
Okay. And said that it mentioned just as Nachshon, if I have the right name, did a brave and courageous thing that went down in history by jumping in while it was still dangerous and before it parted. This creature that had not become fully amphibian yet was brave and crawling into the sea. I rolled my eyes and threw the book in the garbage can. This is a very famous and a very otherwise intelligent rabbi.
Yeah, but he doesn't. But he either understands how it really happened, and is, regardless of what he knows or not, doing that is a trick. It is, and that's what I'm talking about, miseducation rather than a lack of education. Somebody who is orthodox, who never had much exposure to science or whatever, reads that and thinks, wow, it is so silly. Because he is talking about real concepts of evolution, and he is using real terminology and sort of like the familiarity of it, and a person can see it and say, well, these are the kinds of things I've heard, but then he throws in that little curveball where he's throwing a complete BS story about how it happened and makes it entertaining so that the person absorbs it more readily. It's very slick, and it's pure lies.
Yeah.
That's misinformation, and that's teaching people.
Yeah.
So that not you're like, well, I never learned that because it was forbidden. No, I learned it, and it makes no sense. Well, because they lied to you, and it happens all the time. Let me just
about
see.
10 years ago.
Yeah, so one of our guests just posted. I wanted to mention. He says many rabbis accept evolution, genetic mutation within a species, but not from one species to another. I don't know. I have no idea where they think dogs came from, since we all know they came from wolves. Yeah, I think to accept evolution within a species is just utter stupidity. I don't even know what that's supposed to mean. I honestly do. Evolution, by its definition, involves the concept of speciation. Otherwise, all it is variety. I don't really even know what that means. I don't know why a rabbi would.
I think what the rabbis are doing there is they have to admit that evolution takes place, because you can see it in a lab over a period of a few weeks. They do experiments with fruit flies who reproduce a new generation in a matter of days and a few generations in a matter of weeks. And they change the environment in the lab, and they watch the fruit flies adapt to the environment and change their color or some other aspect of their physiology to adapt to environments. To know that evolution is taking place, and that it's caused by mutations and caused by adaptations to the environment. But they try to try to say that it's limited to that, and that it's sort of like microevolution and not macroevolution, and that there's no evidence they claim that no evidence has yet been found of one species transforming into another.
Yeah, don't get into the whole crocoduck nonsense. The idea of evolution is speciation. What they're saying makes no sense at all. They're not even talking about evolution. When you talk about evolution, the ultimate result of evolution that makes it so, so substantial and such a significant part of history is that eventually enough change happens that one is not able to successfully breed with the other. That's speciation. Every time they want to know, where one becomes another, it's everywhere. Every single different species that's only slightly different from another species, but different enough that it cannot reproduce with one another. That's it. Those are your connecting dots. And
yeah, I understand. What they're harping on is the fact that you can find a particular animal in the paleontological record. You can find a particular animal that looks like it's probably the ancestor of an animal that came later, but has enough significant differences to say that animal could not have transformed itself into the later animal because they would have had to make too many step jumps at once. What they wanted to do is to keep dividing the difference, the missing link. It used to be they said, "Where's the missing
Everyone
link?"
is a missing link
Monkey and man. Every time someone finds a missing link, they say, "Well, where's the missing link
between those two.
the monkey
It's
and
it's
that
it's
missing
it's
link?"
it's like the story. I'm kind of a little bit reluctant to tell this story on this program because this really is not a program about atheists or atheism. I'd like to think that our community that we're building is not an atheist community, even though you and I happen to be atheists. But it was a very not only entertaining, but it really drove the point home when Richard Dawkins told the story that when they do this, it's like, imagine a murder trial where the prosecution presents video evidence. There were surveillance videos all over the manor where this person was murdered, and they present video evidence of the suspect, of the person that's on trial, entering the manor with a knife, and then as he turns a corner, they show him coming from the end of a hallway through the living room, and then the third piece of video evidence from a third camera shows him leaving the room with the bloody corpse right behind him and the dripping knife in his hand. Now, yes, it doesn't show him actually stabbing, but it's enough evidence. And the defense says that, but between the first and the second video, there's a gap where he goes through that hallway, which we don't see. And between the second and the third video, there's a gap between when he comes through the living room, which we don't see him entering the living room or exiting the living room. And then the prosecution says, actually, there is an additional piece of evidence we have, video footage, that shows him going through the kitchen, which leads to the living room. Okay, and then the defense says, but we don't have a video showing how he entered the hallway through this parlor into the kitchen, and we don't have from going from the kitchen to the living room. So now you have even more gaps between your evidence.
Yeah.
Which is exactly the game they always play. Every species that's between two species that's actually a link, which we're lucky to find. Every time we find one and we have just presented an additional piece of evidence, we've doubled the amount of gaps available for them to complain about. It's funny and it's true, and it's very sad.
It's a very good analogy, and I should point out that there's a very good reason for whatever gaps there are in the record, and that is that most bodies, including the bones, degrade over thousands of years, and when you have evolutionary steps that took place millions of years ago, it's remarkable that you find any evidence at all that is still intact.
It's true. We're lucky to find what we find.
In wet places, and they're under flow of water or other conditions that cause bone to disintegrate. It's amazing to find anything. So it's not as if they have billions of pieces of skeletons and other things from the ancient past. They have thousands. And when you have only thousands, you are going to not have a complete record of every step. But it's obvious from looking at the later animal that the prior animal is its ancestor because of the similarities, and because you don't find the later animal often in the same strata as the prior animals. You know that it came later, and very often the prior animal dies out. You don't find evidence of it in later strata. So you have these two animals from different periods, very, very similar, with a few changes. To say that we don't have evidence of each one of those changes is really not being fair to the record and to science.
They don't understand what the likelihood of finding this evidence is. They're kind
No,
of bottom line people. Show it to me and prove it to me right now in front of me. Put it all on the table. They don't understand the complexity and the vast amount of information that we're dealing with. And, it's like expecting to be a rocket scientist without ever having taken a single class in any kind of science. You can't. The fact that these things are agreed upon by all the scientists worldwide, for the most part, gives you an idea that it has support, that it's collaborative, that it's true.
The other problem then, that's exactly right, that it is, that we do have massive support that evolution is true. But one of the problems is that while we have extensive evidence of a common descent of things from a primordial life form and many stages in between, we don't have a complete theory yet of how that happens, how the speciation takes place. And we don't have a complete theory of that. And that's one of the reasons why coupling the absence of a complete theory with the lack of some of the evidence of some of the steps is enough to make people who otherwise don't want to believe in evolution, just doubt it. But you can't really explain it. Either you accept the Torah as you and you say all these animals were created, and that in medieval times, many Rishonim felt that no species ever goes extinct, and that no species ever comes into existence from that wasn't there at the time Hashem created the world. That was the view in medieval times. Later the Achronim saw, the dodo bird going extinct, and saw evidence of other animals, skeletons and fossils of other animals that had gone extinct, and they had to abandon that. But their elegant theory about the Torah was that God created a perfect world with a perfect animal kingdom, and that all the animals that we have now are the original animals. And the fossil record proved that wrong, and it's being abandoned. And I just wanted to add that in 2007, I believe, the evidence for evolution became so great that the RCA, which is the main rabbinical organization of modern Orthodoxy, over 1,000 rabbis, came out with an official pronouncement that is permissible, in light of the evidence, permissible to believe in evolution, as long as your evolutionary theory leaves some room for God to act. They did not want to accept the Darwinian evolution, which is basically random, because that they felt went against the idea that God designed the world with man in mind and has control over things. But they could not deny anymore that species descended from other species and changed, and species died off and went extinct, and other species came into existence. They couldn't deny that, and they said it's permissible to believe that these things have been happening over a long period of time, as long as you leave some room for God in it.
Well, you mentioned that. I remember we've talked about that privately a lot, and I have my opinions about its merit versus whether it was done correctly. One of the things you mentioned is we don't have like a complete theory. I mean, random mutation is all it is. And when we think of random mutation, we're not talking about like the X-Men. We're not talking about suddenly a dog growing 8 tails and 12 legs. We're talking about very, very slight differences. Very slight differences that in some circumstances give that particular variety an advantage for survival and procreation. And we're also talking about large numbers, where we're not talking about, well, one dog had a slightly sharper claws and therefore turned into an entire population of a new species. That dog procreated, and its children had these, and maybe 2 of them died, but 1 survived because of the fact that he had that advantage and he procreated. It's a numbers game. And one of the gentlemen in the attendance here said that one of the things that he still is a challenge to him in understanding is that it seems to him that there have been way too many evolutionary changes needed to have happened to explain ultimately human evolution. And what you need to understand is you are dealing with 4 billion years. That is, it's hard to put that into a perspective where you can understand the slow changes with, like I said, with some little small changes giving a slight advantage to one specific subsect or group that's able to survive 1 more day than the other and procreate rather than die before it gets a chance to have a child and pass on its genes. And the children of that one having more children, and that advantage giving them dominance where they pretty much wipe out the ones that are inferior to them because of that, or in some cases where they're split. The other ones manage to just escape and they divide geographically, and the other ones continue in another direction. And when I say another direction, I talk about more billions of years. That is a very, very long time. It's almost incomprehensible to understand the kind of changes that can happen. But ultimately, yes, complex life is only a few hundred million years old. I'm not certain about that. I don't really know how they're tracing or where they trace it to, but we certainly don't know for sure. Even if it's a few hundred million, that span of time is enormous.
That's a long time.
It is so much time. And listen, there's other possibilities. One of them called transpermia, where the idea is that life forms from a different world seeded our planet, or at least left some kind of genetic material. I think that's a little out there, but it's certainly not impossible. It's just kind of like one of those things where it's an idea to consider or entertain. But we're not saying, one second, we're not saying that, and none of them are saying like, yeah, we've got the puzzle complete, we see it all. That's not the case. You have this challenge to that, you're not sure if it really fits, that it could have gone quite this much. It's the best explanation that we have. It makes sense, and it's supported by the evidence very, very strongly. There is certainly no explanation that is better than this, or supported by the evidence the way this is, and that's what a theory is. It just simply enormous support for this idea. It allows us to find more evidence where we would expect to, because we're following this theory, and more evidence keeps piling up. And then genetics. This was fairly strong. It was incredibly strong, even before they understood genetics. But when we look at the genetics between certain species and others, and we see the similarities and the slight differences, we are 99.6% exact duplicates of chimpanzees. So it's simply the very best explanation. It's not a certainty, and we're not claiming it to be. But the creation story is laughable in comparison. And one person just said in this chat box that something I don't understand, is the mutation really random, or is it in order to give an advantage to the environment? I think the latter, but Dawkins speaks as it's not. Nothing in an animal's body decides to change. It is truly random. But the result of a random change in some circumstances gives an advantage. And I'll give an example. Imagine a geographical area where there's a lot of different animals, where they have to climb trees. For example, right now, in their natural habitat, A capuchin monkey will climb up and get a nut, and then they leave it out to dry so that the husk becomes more brittle, and then they use rocks to bash it open. It's a really beautiful thing to see because you can almost see like humanity in them. But if if one creature has sharper claws and better balance, just slightly, it will have more success getting that food quicker than another one, and it will procreate more frequently and more successfully, and its progeny will have those traits and more frequently successfully procreate. And the other ones will die out because they won't be able to compete. It was a completely random happenstance that this should just happen, that a variety of this species has a little bit of an advantage, but that advantage gives them all they need to be able to be more successful in procreating and having their children survive and procreate themselves than the other ones that don't have that advantage. And if you think about it, think about all the times a random mutation doesn't happen. Yeah, well, that's when a species is simply it's a species. The different species that develop, the speciation, the splits, happen over time when some slight advantages arise in the variety. What are you sending to everybody? You need a lot of small changes.
I'd like to answer 2 comments, if I may.
Go ahead, please. I hope that helped the person who asked this. Somebody else in the chat box is also addressing this, helping him understand it.
Yeah.
But I hope that at least helped.
I would like to try. That same comment about whether the mutation is random or whether it's guided, the mutation helps the animal survive, is random, as Darwin claimed, or whether it's guided, presumably by God, in order to help the animal survive. Well, first of all, if God wanted to guide these mutations so that ultimately human beings would evolve and have the benefit of consciousness and intelligence, etc., why didn't he just create them in the first place?
Do that. You can't say, well, why didn't he just do that?
The way the Bereshit seems to be that the animals and people and plants were all created in the same week. And it's a very inelegant proposition and a very wasteful proposition that God would have created the world 13.8 billion years ago, which seems to be the case, and created our planet only, 4.5 billion years ago, and waited around most of the 4.5 billion years until he, by accretion, developed monkeys and then provided a helping hand so the monkeys can turn into humans. It seems like a silly idea for an omnipotent being who wants to create mankind, which seems to be the centerpiece of the creation, according to Judaism, to create a species that can distinguish between good and evil and choose good and be a reflection of God's image, etc. If that's what you want to create, one would think you wouldn't take 13 billion years to do it, or 4.5 billion years. It just kind of it doesn't make any sense. It's just logical.
On that topic, yeah. Sorry, I thought you were finished.
Yeah, I also wanted to say that our hospitals and our nursing homes are full of children who cannot function in the outside world, and some of them cannot speak, some of them cannot eat, some of them cannot see because of genetic mutations. Mutations are seen every day by doctors and hospitals all around the world, and most of the genetic mutations create problems that are not consistent with life, and some of them create problems that are consistent only with that's helped along by nursing care for years and years, and occasionally a genetic mutation is good. So if you're going to argue that God helps evolution along, and that these mutations are not random, you can't really account for all of the horrible mutations that cripple children and that result in babies with two heads. And even if you look at just the process of having children itself, scientists have found that 50% of the eggs, human eggs that are fertilized in the United States, people have sex, the egg, sperm and egg meet, there's fertilization takes place. Scientists have found that 50% of those fertilized embryos do not make it to a live birth. They get spit out because of genetic mutations. They get spit and other problems. They get spit out as spontaneous abortions. They get spit out as miscarriages, and ultimately some of them get born as stillborns because of these mutations. So I don't think God is helping anything along. The other thing I want, the other comment that someone made. That
Well, I wanted to go into that. Hold on.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, there are two things. First of all, I wanted to touch on the idea what you said. Could you lower your speakers a little, Saul?
My speakers?
Yeah, I'm
Sure.
hearing feedback from you. One of the things that you talk about is that, well, he didn't do a very good job. Why would he do this rather than that? Why would he do this rather than that? That is an age-old trick, because anytime you say, this doesn't seem to be like the most efficient way to do it, you got to lower them a lot more, Saul. I don't know why. You got to lower your speakers. I don't know why. Or reduce your microphone sensitivity.
Reduce my mic? Okay.
Yeah. So one of the things you say is why would God do this? Why would God do that? Why would he, help it along in such a way? Wouldn't it have just been better? Anybody, rabbi, apologetic, whatever, will say, who are you to ask why he did it? He's got his reasons because he's so much greater. How do we know? Because the Torah says so. But what about this? What about these problems that are presented that challenge the Torah? This would have been better. This would have been so much, it would have made more sense. I would be easier to believe it if he had done it in such a way that it matches what we see and it seems sensible. Well, you can't ask why. Why can't I ask why? Because he's greater than all of us. It says so in the Torah. Okay? So you've got a loop there, and you just can't ask questions. One of the things that, Saul, I'm hearing myself. Just turn your speakers very, very, very low. One of the things that did it for me was the starting point of me just simply becoming an atheist, was when I realized that excusing God from all of these logical flaws, all of these common sense ideas that challenge his methodology, and all of the lack of evidence, which I was told, why should he leave evidence? He doesn't have to. It occurred to me at some point, with all of these contradictions, I'm not stupid. I'm a pretty smart person, and my intelligence leads me to good conclusions all the time. I don't give him that excuse anymore. I got to see something that makes sense. And so that was the beginning of the end. I no longer just said, because he's God, it can be complete chaos, make no sense, and it's all still okay. I couldn't live with that anymore. Now, one person asked about artificial selection, and I just want to briefly talk about it. It's not really, it's interesting because it actually helps to understand how natural selection works. Some dogs are a great example because dogs have been artificially selected. Some dogs are, I mean, breeders do this. I am not in favor of the idea of breeders, but because, I own several animals, and they were all from shelters, all adopted. Had we not adopted them, had nobody adopted them, they would have been euthanized. But a breeder will have, dog A that has a beautiful coat of fur and what have you, and female dog B that has whatever also beneficial attributes. They breed, they mate these And the results are puppies. And if some of the puppies look much more beautiful, or even slightly more beautiful than the other, or seem to be more intelligent than the other because of their behavior, or are more resistant to illnesses, they off the other ones and they breed these. And now you've just gotten yourself a little bit more of that good, likable attribute that you like into the next population. That's right. We picked right. And what he said, we picked out wolves that were more people friendly. And in fact, that was mentioned in one of the episodes of Cosmos, the newer series that was hosted by Neil deGrasse Tyson. He was talking about that. And a lot of people like went and challenged it and said, oh yeah, well, they weren't challenging it. Actually, a lot of the comments were that they thought they understood it and they were for the idea of accepting evolution. They said, yeah, some dogs realized if I behave better, I'll get fed and taken care of. No, the end was what you're leading to, but it wasn't that. It was just that some dogs simply behaved better with their owners, and the owners kept those. The dogs that didn't behave well either got into fights or were killed or never stayed with the owners because they didn't like them. So mutation and evolution is not decision based. The event is random, but its advantage lets it survive and procreate. And in the case of artificial selection, the the change is still random. Well, nowadays, maybe once we understand genetics, and maybe when we're able to actually manipulate the nucleotides and actually breed a designer animal, that might change. But until now, what artificial selection has been is that we have rebred the ones that we like because of certain features and discarded the ones we didn't like. And then among all the ones that we liked, some really, really wonderful new feature just randomly happened. We bred that. We may still have bred the other ones because they're still good. And over in real evolution and natural selection, over the millions and millions of years that it took, these can split. They can both survive. Some of them move geographically. Some of them, they separate, and they don't mate with one another anymore, and they keep separating and changing over time. Natural selection still giving them this evolutionary change. Eventually, they're no longer compatible because natural selection and mutation has made them so different that their genetics cannot mix. That's how it works. And like Dawkins says, it's actually elegant because it makes so much sense, and it's observed. We see it happen. We do it with animals. We've been doing it for hundreds of years with horses, with dogs, with cats, with chickens. I mean, we look to produce the best product we can and discard the design that doesn't work. In this case, we really don't have that much control over making the better design, but when we see it happen, we take advantage of it and grab it. There you go. And I'm glad I could have. New species is when they are so far apart from one another that the changes have made them no longer compatible sexually, that they can't reproduce, and that's a substantial difference. That's the difference between what a species means is that the speciation. The only thing you need to know about it is two species. The reason they are species is because the reason that they're different species is they can no longer reproduce they're sexually incompatible to reproduce. That's essentially what it means. Otherwise, they're just extreme diversity among a species. You've got a lot of diversity in dogs. You have labs, and you've got poodles, and you've got Dalmatians, and you've got beagles, and you've got huskies, and there's just millions of them. But they're all still dogs. They actually can mate. What about a mule? Okay, we're stopping with that here.
One of the reasons that they can't reproduce viable offspring, sometimes they produce offspring that are only partly viable, like the commenter asked about a mule.
Yeah, a mule is sterile.
when the species are separating and differentiating, there are situations where they can still mate and produce offspring, but something is usually wrong with the offspring. They're genetically inferior. They have something missing. They have a lot of stillborns. They have inability to reproduce, like the situation with the mule. They even scientists have even mated I think a llama, a llama, and a camel, or two animals that, and manage in a test tube or petri dish, and got something they call a camelid. But I believe it's also not able to reproduce. So that explains that. I think it's probably on a DNA level. When an animal changes through mutation, its DNA reflects those changes. And when the DNA of one animal is so different from the DNA of another,
the DNA doesn't reflect the changes. The DNA is what's changing. The DNA doesn't reflect the changes. The DNA itself is what's mutating and changing.
It has the changes in it, and when the DNA of the sperm does not match the DNA of the egg sufficiently, then either the egg doesn't get fertilized by the sperm, or it gets kicked out as a reject. As I explained with humans, 50% rate, as found by the U.S. I forget what department it is, whatever the medical, the government entity that governs medical research. One last thing I would say is that if you look at a photograph, at an X-ray of a human embryo, you'll find that I think between weeks 5 and 7 of the development of the human embryo, every human embryo has a full-length tail, like a monkey. And you can see it. It's in the books on embryology and genetics, and every embryologist knows about it.
And many babies are born with tails.
And as it's, I'm sorry.
And many babies are born with tails. They surgically remove it.
And as the embryo develops, because of evolution, and the fact that the ancestors of man came down from the trees and didn't need tails anymore to swing on branches, evolution has created certain proteins that suppress the development of that tail, and most of the tail breaks away and gets resorbed into the amniotic fluid. And the first 4 vertebrae that come out from the bottom of the spine fuse together into the coccyx bone. But every 1 in and a half a million, whatever, I don't remember the exact babies that are born actually have a vestigial tail, and sometimes with a vertebrae in it, usually not. And plastic surgeons cut that off. And there's no reason for any of that if humans were created separately from monkeys.
Other than to test our faith.
Yeah, to test our faith, yeah.
He's a slick trickster.
We have a principle in Judaism called L'fnei lo siten mikshal, and I'm sure God picked that up when he wrote the Torah before creation. That concept. So the idea that he's putting all these dinosaur bones and putting human, monkey tails in human embryos, etc., just to test our faith is really absurd.
One more thing that I wanted to talk about very quickly is that evolution doesn't always help the creature. There are not just mutations that give it an advantage. There are mutations that give it a severe disadvantage. And I'd like to ask the audience, and this is kind of a goofy thing, but very quickly, how do you plant, you get in the supermarket seedless oranges, seedless grapes. How do you plant those? The answer is you don't, because there are no seeds. By definition, you cannot. So how do they exist? Well, we managed to find a tree one time or a few times or wherever. I'm sure it happened more than once in different places. that fruit were growing and had no seeds. And they said, hey, this would be great for people to buy. But what they have to do is they have to cultivate those and graft branches that can produce fruit with no seeds because it has those DNA. And I'm not sure the exact technicalities, but what they do is they take that and graft it onto freshly planted trees that are regular trees of regular fruit producing, but they take the branch from a certain point where it's going to produce the fruit from the trees that produce oranges with no seeds, and they graft that on to the other ones so that they can make more trees of seedless fruit producing fruit, or they can make more trees that produce the seedless fruit, because you cannot plant them to make more trees because they have no seeds. Before we were doing this, such a mutation would be like, okay, well, those oranges fall to the ground and they never grow again. They don't, no new trees. I mean, that's the way a tree reproduces, is its seeds of its fruit fall to the ground, the fruit are eaten by animals and carried away, and then the seeds don't get digested, or they're spit out, or they don't get digested and they're excreted, and those things hopefully get watered and they get sunlight and turn into a new tree. But if there are no seeds in the fruit, that won't happen, and that tree is just going to be alone and eventually die. Grafting is where you, let's say, cut a branch at a certain section, and you take that branch and you cut a branch off of another tree, and you take this branch from this tree and you splice it onto there. I mean, I'm not sure exactly how they do it, but the tissue actually reconnects itself. In a sense, it thinks it's healing. I'm maybe doing a botched job of it, but I'm telling it in a very, very simplistic term. And you can definitely look this up.
I think it also can happen. I think it also can happen in nature. Sometimes when a tree has a genetic mutation that produces fruit that don't have seeds, sometimes you will find seed occasionally in one of the oranges.
Yes, you see what? Yes, it
and
can.
If that falls to the ground, and,
so then we call it a fruit that's producing fewer seeds, and that's the mutation. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. One last thing I want to mention is, and I happen to love this subject, and I happen to love all of the science about life. There was a documentary done on the BBC that I have it recorded, and I plan that one day it would be available. But I want to encourage any who, and if you'd like me to tell you where you can get hold of it, it's called Life, and it's a 12-part series narrated by what's his name, David Attenborough, and each episode is an expose on a very close, in-depth, and right in there in the field study of certain life. And then they have a very brief documentary piece of the documentary showing what they had to go through to make this, because they weren't doing this like from a kind of zoo point of view. I mean, the divers went with high definition cameras and dove in and swam with sharks. They got right in there in a battle between a bison or a buffalo or something, and the animals that were attacking it. I think it was cheetah or something. So they really got right in there, and they studied life extensively all around the globe. And it's one of I think it's the most magnificent documentary of life and its diversity and evolution that I've ever seen. I've watched the whole series several times, and it is really remarkable. It's inspiring, it's remarkable, it's awe-inspiring, and it really shows you what life is like on this planet. And I think once you watch this, you cannot possibly not think that evolution is true. It's really beautiful and amazing. So I strongly recommend it. And
you can access some of these series online if you know what channel produced it.
Yeah, but I would suggest give me an email if you'd like to get hold of it, and I can help you. It's really absolutely. It's called Life. It was made by the BBC back in about 2010, I think. I think they worked on it between like 2007 and 2010, It took them a few years to put together, and it is absolutely magnificent. So and I would love to have a viewing of it once, like maybe we do like the first 2 episodes. It'll be a couple of hours, and we get together somewhere, and it's absolutely, it's majestic, um, and I found it to be extremely inspiring. I learned a lot from it, and it's just simply beautiful to watch, and to see how life behaves all around the world and the diversity that's out there. Um, and so, okay, so Saul, I want to know if you want any closing comments. I just want to first say thank you to, we have quite a few people who have attended, and you've posted comments and questions, and I really appreciate that. And you know, every time we do one of these conferences, I just want to have maybe 1, 2 more people, and I want it to grow. I think we've got a lot of topics to discuss. I think that we can help one another understand, um, you know, the theological and philosophical challenges that we've been struggling with, and I think that then we put this online for other people to view, and maybe it'll encourage some of them to attend in the future. Um, so thank you so much, and it's really been a pleasure, you know, having this great discussion. Saul?
Yeah, I'd also like to thank everybody who watched or listened in, and just add that the people who study these things, the zoologists and others who study life and the history of life on the planet, can refute any creationist and can refute any rabbi who says that everything was created the way it is now 5,700 years ago. The people who know really know, and they're expert in these things. And if you watch some of these documentaries that are done and read some of the, or even videos on YouTube, you will discover how much there is, and it'll be explained by people who understand the details intimately.
All right. And thank you everybody for coming. I appreciate that you dedicated the time to this, and I hope that future episodes will be just as um, you know, involved and enjoyable and productive. And I'm going to say have a good day to everybody, and I'm sure we'll talk soon at some point on Facebook or something. This program has been presented by the organization Only Emes. Emes is the Hebrew word for truth. And our website address will be in the description, as well as our email address. Um, we are young and we are growing. The goal is to become a real community center. Uh, we need donations, big or small, big preferably, but anything you can give. If you can give us some time to help us do something, research, or volunteer to, you know, to do fundraising for us, try to get other people to make some contributions. We have a lot on our website, starting to get more and more. Um, but we need you. We need the people in the community who we want to help. We need them to take some steps, even if it's just helping to promote and bring awareness of the organization. I'm Dan Taller. This is Saul Shajnfeld, and thank you so much for joining us today.